Good afternoon, everyone. I will be reporting on how to assess comprehension. So, I am basing my report mainly on Joanne Shute Caldwell, Guilford Publications, titled Comprehension Assessment, a Classroom Guide, published in 2008. Assessing comprehension, what, how, and for what purpose. So this is the article written by Joanne Shute, which I will base my report from now on. Okay, so when we say comprehension, the macro skills in English that comes to mind is actually reading, right? In most tests we encountered as a student before and now as we are teachers, reading a selection and having a test based on that selection are the most common comprehension assessment there is. Do you agree? Now, comprehension, is it only for reading? Now, we begin by revisiting its definition. According to Joanne Schultz Caldwell, comprehension is extremely complex entity. So none of us can really pinpoint the exact way how to go about assessing comprehension. But this should not be an excuse to poor teaching performance, nor a consideration for having a poor assessment result. Comprehension is the ability to interpret information in one's own words, and application entails applying learned content to new situations. So, whether you are reading, listening, and viewing, this include two basic skills. First, decoding, which means extracting meaning, whether from spoken or written words or visual stimuli, and the second one is comprehension. Now, comprehension is the capacity of the mind to perceive and understand. So here's a summary preview of my topic. Now, what am I assessing? So the components of this assessment is, of course, the literal aspect, and then inferential, and then application. So the mode would be reading, listening, and viewing. And the text that involves with this are narrative, expository, and familiar or unfamiliar. Next topic could be either literature, mathematics, social sciences, or social studies and sciences. Okay, let's focus more on how we are going to assess comprehension. So part of this, we have about 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 components or suggestive steps on how you would assess comprehension. And the most common assessment for comprehension in the Philippine setting is the formal standardized assessment. Now, let's move on to the next slide so we could deliberately talk about this topic. Now, formal standardized assessments include standardized measures that are often administered to an entire class, grade level, or group of students. Now, the same assessment is administered to all students at the same time to get a picture of each student's performance in comparison to other students. Now, a most common example of this is the pre-test and the post-test, the PhilIRE or the Philippine Informal Reading Inventory, and the National Achievement Test or the NAT. So actually, NAT is a standardized set of examinations taken in the Philippines by students in grade 3, 6, 10, and 12. Now, this test is actually designed to determine their academic levels, strengths, and weaknesses, as well as their knowledge learned in major subjects throughout the year. Now, in English subject test, in NAT, especially in reading comprehension. The type of test includes identifying main ideas, subtopics, and order of sentences. Along with the NAT test, it also involves grammar. Now, the next word comprehension, that is, people who know, well, according to to Joanne Caldwell, in her article, she said that people who know more word meanings tend to comprehend more effectively. So good assessment is always tied to instruction, and the same activities recommended for teaching vocabulary can be used to assess it. Now, of course, in NAT, there's also grammar, which in the form of synonyms, antonyms, context clues, analogies, and parallelism. Parallelism. Sorry about that. Okay. Now, another way to assess comprehension is in informal classroom assessments. Now, in this assessment, this is actually non-standardized measure since this is only limited to the classroom. So these are often personalized to the student. Now, they can be given flexibly throughout the school year to provide a snapshot of a student's skill in a specific area at a given time. For example, essays could be included in your periodic test, or work samples, projects, portfolios, observations, and checklists. Well, in my own classroom, in my own assessment of this before the pandemic and during this time of pandemic, informal classroom assessments involve, well, the choices, again, I've mentioned this before, that they will be given choices to submit videos, example, role play. They will be just reading, what do you say, scripts. And another way is to have them create an infographic based on the material they have viewed from a tutorial on how to make a digital infographic. Another way would be also to give them a selection, and then they would draw or illustrate it creatively in a way that they would like to express themselves. For example, they will be given a selection about the origin of, or why do frogs cry when it rains. So out from the story, they will extract a scenario of that story, and then they would illustrate it in an illustration board. Of course, they will draw it using materials that are common in their surroundings. Okay. Another way to assess comprehension is also selected response assessments. Now, selected response tests are those that are composed of questions to which there is typically only one best answer. So they are sometimes referred to as objective assessments. Now, some of the most commonly used selected response tests include multiple choice, fill in the blank, true or false, and or matching questions or matching items. Now, according to Nielsen in 2016, he noted that these tests are good for assessing students' ability to remember and understand course concepts, ideas, materials, but it cannot measure students' abilities to create or organize, communicate, define problems, or conduct research. Okay, actually, there's a point here that when we do assessment of comprehension, we have to go beyond the literal part, you know. We have to encourage students to think more, how do you say this? To think having those 21st century skills, like the research skills. What else are those 21st century skills? Anyone can think of? Evaluate, analyze, compare, justify, so describe. So these are actually indicators uh, that you have been assessing comprehension in a correct manner. So these are components of comprehension. So literal, inferential, and application. These are the three main components that you have to assess in your in comprehension, whether in reading, listening, and also viewing. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. So this is also another suggestion into how Caldwell would assess comprehension questions. So commonly, of course, questions are educators. Well, all of us teachers will always ask questions to evaluate our students or learners' comprehension, whether they understood or not. We have to ask questions. So we must remember if those questions that we ask actually tap to the literal understanding of facts, or is it understanding at a higher inferential level? So we cannot just ask just questions just because, you know, just ask questions, but we have to know that those questions are inclined into our students' higher order thinking skills. So, okay, another suggestion also on how to assess comprehension is student dialogue. Now, according to Joanne Caldwell, fostering student-centered dialogue through practices such as thoughtful talk and thinking aloud provides another window on the comprehension process. And students' dialogue can be evaluated according to the nature of their comments, whether literal, inferential, and applications. So if you would just let the students or the learners talk with your guided questions, of course, you can actually assess whether your students are just simply grasping the surface of your lesson, or either whether they are also thinking deeply of what the impact of the lesson. So student dialogue is also one good way to assess comprehension among the learners. Okay, the last one would be comprehension proxies, or RTI. So RTI is actually response to instruction. Now, closed technique is one good example of comprehension proxies. So this is where students fill in missing words in a piece of text. So most likely, this just fill in the blanks. But according to Caldwell, Miss Caldwell, she said that there are problems with the use of comprehension proxies, no matter how attractive the process may seem. First, she said that they are at best only an indirect measure of comprehension process. So the ability to fill in a missing word sheds little light on a student's ability to understand facts, draw inferences, and or apply knowledge. Now, second, she said that educators often interpret correlation as establishing a causal relationship, and they regard word recognition and fluency as causes of comprehension. Okay? When we talk about assessing comprehension, especially when we use Phil-IRI tools. Actually, in Phil-IRI, we have word recognition and also comprehension part of assessing. Okay, so the learners are actually given list of words to read, so whether they can identify those words or not. So the process there is to just identify. Now, most learners can read and identify those words, but when they are asked the meaning of those words, they actually couldn't tell what those meanings are. So word recognition and word comprehension is actually totally different. So we must not actually draw conclusions by just saying, oh, she could read that, the learner could read that word, so it doesn't mean that they could actually understand what it means. Okay, so anyhow, these are all just basic suggestions, or actually the simplest way that Ms. Joanne Caldwell could identify in assessing comprehension, since comprehension is actually a very complex entity. So these are just the main parts that she could think of. Actually, there are actually more, but as we're just only learning the very basic of this assessment, so I think that's all I can tell you about her suggestions and concepts. So according to her, for our professional development activities as teachers to increase our understanding of comprehension assessment, we have to start asking ourselves and examine a published test that we have used in the past or are planning to use. So we must identify those sections, whether we are assessing the literal comprehensions and which ones assess inferential comprehension, and if we are only assessing application or learning. So she also said that she told us that we have to examine how we code entries in our gradebook or in our electronic computer recorder. What do you call this? Assessment plans. We also have to be specific in our rubrics when we try to assess the comprehension, whether in viewing, in listening, or in reading. Okay, so we also have to ask if our system allows us to note patterns across assessment formats, and if the three components of comprehension are present, so the literal, inferential, and the application. So we have to choose also the most recent entries in our grade book or class record, and we have to determine how we have to code them with regards to assessment format and comprehension component. So thank you guys for listening. So if you have questions, you just have to message me, because if you are actually viewing this one, my report, that means that we still have power outage here in Linneman. So thank you and God bless. Bye.